This is the Writers Podcast, a Writers After Dark radio production, bringing you the best in writing advice, news, trends, and interviews. Hosted by award-winning authors S.K. Anthony and Raymond Esposito.
Hello and welcome back to the Writers Podcast. I'm S.K. Anthony and I'm here with my co-host Raymond Esposito. Raymond, tell us, what's on your mind tonight?
On my mind tonight, don't I always tell you? Well, recently there was a big to-doozy, I made up that word, but there was a big to-doozy over a young adult novel, The Handbook for Mortals. And at issue was the book's obtainment of a #1 position on the New York Times bestseller list, when in fact the book was not yet available in stores or on Amazon.
The short story is that Greek Nation, the publisher, apparently was behind placing large strategic orders at local bookstores in order to boost the book's rating, and for a few moments it actually worked.
Yeah, there was an amazing amount of social media outrage around the issue, which had these folks read my article on how to become a New York Times bestseller, which I published a few months ago, they would not have been so surprised.
So it's on them. They should have just read it.
Yeah, I was more surprised that everybody didn't read the article, but I guess that happens from time to time. They miss some of the things I put out there.
Listen, we've all seen the alleged bestseller that gives us pause and makes us question the sanity of the system.
50 Shades of Grey, Twilight, anything by Nora Roberts. Yeah, I've been there. You know, this latest incident, it just shows how deeply flawed these lists can be.
So tonight, we're going to unravel the dark mysteries of the New York Times best-selling methods. We're going to cover Amazon's new approach. We'll talk about the qualitative things that do work, and we'll consider why so much effort is made to keep indie authors out of the spotlight.
The truth is, we wouldn't be having this conversation if not for the advent of indie authors who are staunch watchguards of the industry and for Amazon.
Amazon owns 41% of the print book market and over 70% of the ebook sales. And this large contribution has given us a different view of what is popular and what sells.
Yeah, sure. Before Indies and Amazon, we read what was served up to us. We waited in line for the possibility of being published. And we believed that whatever they said was a bestseller was in fact a bestseller.
The trouble Amazon caused, though, is that often their bestsellers, which are based on actual sales, don't match up with other lists, like the New York Times.
Mm-hmm. At first, I think the discrepancy was easy to ignore, but as more and more people have turned to Amazon, at times these other bestseller lists, they seem alien in their selections, or as in the recent case, they're exposed as fraud.
Perhaps the oddest revelation to most people is that bestseller lists don't actually mean bestseller.
Right. It was odd to me. But of course, landing a spot on the New York Times bestseller list is still an author's Olympic gold medal. It's one of the quickest ways to become a household name, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you make the list, you're going to sell a ton more books.
But once you understand how it works, it's really a little depressing and honestly seems a bit unfair to indies at best and like sabotage at worst.
When we began investigating the system, we were a bit naive in our thoughts on the subject. I certainly was. We believed the list was a unit sales ranking system. Sell more books or the most books and boom, you're on the list.
How dare you think that? That's too logical. Unfortunately, that isn't really how it works. The truth is a little bit more of a gut punch to your average author. Seems to me there's some ugly truths about publishing, and this one was, for me, probably the most disappointing.
Yeah, and do keep in mind that the exact method of the New York Times bestseller calculation is a trade secret. In other words, much like credit cards and Facebook algorithms, we can only glean the system indirectly. However, these 7 methods have all been validated as components. We just don't know how much weight each one of the components carry.
The most important factor to be aware of is in the New York Times' own words. The creation of the list is a survey, not a science. Now, from that statement, we can conclude that we're not just counting and analyzing numbers here. We're inserting opinions and feelings.
And from the research, we know that all of these factors go into making that list.
Okay, and try not to break anything after you hear these.
Yeah, because the first factor is know a lot of influential people.
I know you. Does that count?
It counts in many ways, but it just doesn't count for the New York Times bestseller list at this particular moment.
Gosh darn it, Raymond. Anyway, so it matters because the calculations are based on surveys. And because the surveys ask for opinions regarding a book's potential popularity, that's right, potential popularity. So in other words, knowing people in the business is a good way to get on the list.
Yeah, what sort of individuals do you want to know? Well, publishers, book buyers, distributors, and retailers. It also helps if your book is already on the survey's checklist, which is a list of books the Times thinks will be bestsellers and which the respondent can just simply check off.
These checklists, why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Let's say that the New York Times, for example, knows that J.K. Rowling is putting out the 8th Harry Potter book in a couple weeks, but they're sending out their survey today. They'll drop her book on that checklist, even though it's not out yet.
So basically, this takes us to the second point, which is hype, 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 right? Because that's exactly what she does.
Exactly. That's what that checklist is all about. It's like a hot stock. Anticipation and hype, they go a long way.
Yeah, you can guarantee that J.K. Rowling, Stephen King, and Brad Thor are going to be on the bestseller list the moment they hit publish.
Yes. And it's true that they'll probably sell 1 million copies, but you can see that no one actually waits around to calculate those sales before calling the winner. The third factor is work at the New York Times.
But I tried, Raymond, and they won't hire me.
Oh. See, they're terrible all around.
Yeah, one of the biggest criticisms, the Times has faced is that their employees' books always make the list. Always.
That means there's a little more than in the club mentality going on in the selection process. As a matter of fact, you can also be out of the club too by, say, being an indie romance writer.
Yeah, can't believe they stopped that. They took it off the list now, right? Mm-hmm. But anyway, the fourth way of getting on that list is by hiring people to buy your books.
Yeah, when people have manipulated the Amazon system, there's always been outrage and stories, and we hear, or we have heard, up until this most recent case, very little about the manipulation on the Times list, but as we see, it's just as rampant.
But some agencies will ensure, in fact, guarantee you a spot on the list. You just need the right amount of money. The New York Times list includes something called fast sales. If you can get an agency to purchase your books from multiple locations in the same week, you will gain a place on the list, exactly like what we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast.
And you can actually do the same thing on Amazon just by having a bunch of people, and you need far less books purchased because on the New York Times bestseller list, it won't last longer than the money you've spent. But hey, once you're on the bestseller list, you're a bestseller. And that never goes away. So, of course, you need somewhere between $10,000 and $200,000 for that buy-in.
But if you can't do that, you can also go to point number 5. Mm-hmm. Get them to double count your books.
The best part is you really don't even have to get them to double count because they'll do it themselves. Just see items 1 and 2. In short, retailers, wholesalers, etc., they'll count your sales when the books are purchased in bulk and again when the consumer makes the purchase.
So when an author sells 100,000 books in the first week, usually that includes the books bought for distribution and the books purchased by consumers.
Do we know if it happens all the time? Some of the time? Most of the time? No, but it does happen. The 6th point is practice the right politics. This is a great way to get yourself on the list.
Yes. Another criticism of the list is that the folks making the final decision like one political leaning more than another.
Yeah, if you don't practice their brand of politics or social welfare, then your book will not last as long on the bestseller list. It'll take longer to get on the list, and it might not even make it regardless of the sales. And you can confirm this with any well-known political conservative.
Yes, remember that checklist on the survey? Yeah, just don't make a book an option on that survey, and poof, it's just gone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So the final way of getting on that list is simple. Sell books by writing a great story people love.
Yeah, even with all the flaws and manipulations, a great book that people love still works and still can work its way on the list. Writing a great book is really the only pathway for independent authors and the primary method they've used to breach the ranks of the list. Unfortunately, it's also the most difficult path.
Yeah, no kidding. What indie authors can take issue with, however, is the continued segregation that occurs, and in some cases, the direct attempts to thwart the indie movement.
We won't go into the reasons why the professional review services like Kirkus, Clarion, and even Publishers Weekly see a need to have two review services.
Yeah, we won't go into the reasons except that they're poopy heads. But yes, one is for normal authors and one is for indie authors.
Right, because apparently in judging a story on its merits, one must first consider if a story has been pre-approved by a publisher.
But clearly, the New York Times decision to pull the romance ebook category from this list is a direct shot at the heart of indie writing.
I have often admitted I don't write or read romance, but these writers, the majority of which are female, are the heart and passion of the indie movement. They work hard, they promote harder, and they interact with their fans both on social media and in person in ways that even few celebrities do.
Yeah, there was some unintelligible reason given by the Times as to why it made sense to stop reporting ebooks romance numbers. But come on, we all know that was BS.
And you can read a great article, a great letter to the New York Times by Romance Writers of America. They give them a pretty good slap down, and it diffuses the New York Times lame explanation. But to me, removing the romance numbers from the bestseller list is a lot like reporting on winter but leaving out the snowfall amounts for January and February. It's just not going to add up. But again, the great thing is readers don't read the New York Times and they don't care about those lists anyways.
Now, in fairness to the New York Times and other list makers.
In fairness, because we don't want them to not include us on their list, but go ahead.
Right. We in the future. Although their system is flawed and perhaps even prejudiced, their method of calculation isn't completely their fault.
No, Amazon's disruption did create dramatic changes in how consumers purchase and read book titles and do other shopping.
Right, plus Amazon owns a big chunk of the numbers and they have practiced a pretty large degree of secrecy.
Yeah, they're not good at sharing. So industry people have simply been forced to do a lot of their calculations without the input of the giant bookseller.
And the result has been a whole lot of numbers, many of which seem at odds with authors' experiences or readers' behaviors.
But whether Amazon is the cause of the problem or the solution, they seem to share our confusion as to what constitutes a bestseller.
Which is why recently Amazon launched its own dashboard, on which they rank book sales by sales and by page reads.
Imagine that. A bestseller list that actually lists books by those most purchased and most read.
I cannot believe it.
The horror.
But
Wait,
just because...
But how am I going to get my friend's book on the list if it really has to go by sales?
Anyway, but just because the Amazon list is straightforward, it doesn't mean it's any less of a challenge to get on their list.
There is a business to writing, and it's called marketing, and these are the practices you'll ultimately need to learn, embrace, and perfect if you want to be a household name.
So what does it take, and what does an author really need to do besides writing a great book?
Well, it's not easy, and the numbers may scare you more than the New York Times bestseller criteria. But we'll start with my favorite success story.
Oh, your girlfriend, Meredith Wild?
I don't know if she's a hottie, but she's kind of a hottie when I talk about success. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. She was an indie author. She sold a ton of books. She earned a $6 million contract for books she had already sold to readers as an indie author. And she ultimately began her own small press publishing company.
Yeah, but it wasn't about luck that she achieved her success. It was about believing in herself enough to take a very high risk.
Very high. One of the things that she and her husband did, who was a fireman, so they weren't rich, was they borrowed $70,000 from their home, equity, and credit cards. Now, I believe in my books, but $70,000 in credit card debt, that's a really brave investment.
Right, so what'd she do with that money? Most of it she used for advertising. And we're not talking about $50 Facebook ads here.
No, we're not.
She went and bought space at movie theaters, and she planted her romance book ads right before the opening of 50 Shades of Grey.
Genius.
Very genius.
Now, Meredith had been in marketing, so she knew that if she's going to sell books in mass, she needed to approach marketing with the same tenacity that the larger brands do.
And it certainly paid off.
Another popular method is the belief that free books is the way to increase reach.
Well, that's true and it's not true. Free books used to be a great way to get your stuff read and noticed. But it became so common, it just isn't effective unless you can really do it big.
And I doubt anyone can do it as big as the most successful authors of the early days did. They didn't give away 5 or 10 books. They gave away 10, 20, 30,000 copies. I read one article a few years ago that said the author gave away 300,000 free copies. Just do the math on that. I don't even know if that's possible unless you have a couple $1 million.
But was that ebooks or actual?
That was actual books in people's
That
hands.
is
Yeah,
insane.
insane.
Wow. But yeah, success, that's because success is a series of ingredients, just like cooking. It's not a matter of adding salt. It's a case of adding the right amount of salt.
Yeah, and with free ebooks, you have to go big or go home. Listen, it just doesn't work on the small scale. Yeah, you'll get a few reads, maybe some reviews, but because free books are free, they often result in just hoarding, especially ebooks.
Yeah. We've both done the free weekends on Kindle. And it's actually really scary when you see the number of page reads and reviews compared to the thousands of downloads we've received.
Yeah, I'm just assuming that like when I'm dead or 10 years after I'm dead, like those books, people get around to reading the book they downloaded of mine. And, at that point, 80,000 page reads or something like that. And back in the day, I did a 10 print book giveaway on Goodreads. I literally signed and mailed these books to the winners. And I even put in a personal note. The result of that was 3 reviews. 3 out of 10.
I did the same thing. And, well, you were luckier than me because all I got was 1 review.
Yeah. The point to me is that reviews are another strategy that indie authors tend to overvalue. There's no doubt having reviews is better than not having them. But how many?
Because reviews are simply what we call social validation. That is, people look to other people's decision and behaviors to help them make their own choices.
Yeah, it's peer pressure.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader, peer pressure. Simon says, the thing is, for social validation to have selling value, that is to actually help you find readers for your book, you need your book to go viral.
And without promotion and marketing, you're going to need about 2,000 reviews before people take notice on that factor alone.
I just need 1,975 more. So should you give up your dream of the bestsellers list? No, absolutely not. But I say don't make it the litmus test for your success, or use the fact that you're not on it as a commentary on your skill or talent.
Right, just do what you love to do, write a great story, and write it the best damn way you can.
And pay attention to the things like covers and book blurbs, because that's really a part of the marketing strategy.
And be prepared to make your marketing time about 3 times that of your story writing time, which that's just annoying because I don't feel like it.
Yeah, no, I spend about that much time not promoting.
Avoiding it.
Yeah,
avoiding it.
And coming up in another episode, we're going to dive deeper into the book marketing and how to do it professionally.
And you may be surprised to learn what the most important element of book selling is for indie authors.
We certainly will, because we haven't really done the research yet, so we don't know.
But until then, we'll leave you. We'll leave you with this quote from our homeboy, Mark Twain.
It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog.
Thank you for listening to the Writers Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. For more articles, news and advice, visit our website, writersafterdark.net, or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. The Writers Podcast is a Writers After Dark radio production. Executive producers SK Anthony and Raymond Esposito. Copyright 2017.